Hey, Science 8s, it's Manchak here with another lesson for you, our last concept in Unit C, light and optical systems. We're moving into talking about the following. So I'll show you this right away and we'll run through what we need to know. So we are running through a lesson, concept C5, which is eye and camera comparison, as well as looking at other organisms' eyes and some image storage devices, which you guys will get to at some point here. I've shortened this lesson up a little bit to give you guys a little less content to worry about as you move through this week. Hoping to try to keep everything at a reasonable amount for you. So this is just a rundown, and this will also be posted on your Google Classroom of what we've got going on for this concept. So as always, when I launch into the lesson, please make sure you've got your notes out with you and you're following along with in your notes, however that might look. And make sure that you are highlighting or underlining, and if anything doesn't make sense, make note of it so you can track me down and ask me a question about that. So we're gonna first, I'll point out here that we're following through these textbook pages 223 through 238, so use that as a secondary resource as you need it. I've got a number of videos that I'll post in the Google Classroom under the C5 resources section, so that you can go through these. Again, these videos are not absolutely you have to watch them. I think they're interesting. They take us a little bit further into what we're learning in the concept. And then you're going to have some practice, formative stuff that you need to work your way through, including a few questions out of the textbook, a relatively short worksheet summarizing what we've gone through, and then there'll be a practice quiz up on the Google Classroom for you to work your way through and answer those questions. And then lastly, there will be actually two summative things, 4-mark stuff that we'll do at the end of this concept as well. One will be your quiz that we always do at the end of the concept, and then the second one is sort of, I'm going to call it a bonus activity, if you'd like. It'll sort of count as a lab, and if you have time to do it and you want something a little extra to do, you can do this bonus activity called Eyes in the Animal Kingdom, and then submit it to me. I'll put it up on the Google Classroom as well, but remember, it's going to be a bonus kind of thing, so you don't have to do it. What I really want to make sure you do for the summative stuff is the quiz, but if you want to do this, we'll put it under the lab section as a little bit of boost to your mark if you do well on it, those kinds of things. So I'm going to switch over to this. This requires me to move my camera briefly, and I'm going to put it down in the bottom right here so that it doesn't interfere anymore, and we'll go through and talk about what's going on in concept C5. So this one is called Eyes and Cameras Capture Images Using the Properties of Light. So just as a refresher, looking back to what we've talked about all unit, starting in C1, we outlined 4 properties of light that we were going to explore. We were going to explore the fact that light travels in straight lines, which we did explore. We were going to explore the fact that light reflects off of certain surfaces, which we did explore. We talked about the fact that light can bend, so refraction, which we explored in this unit, and then we also talked about light as a form of energy, which we did in concept C4, our most recent concept. What we're going to do in this concept, and this is just out of the program of studies, is we are going to basically go through and talk about how our human eye is used to capture images of what we see, and then how that eye is similar to what cameras do, and there are some differences as well. And then we'll spend a little bit of time exploring how animals' eyes are similar and different to humans' eyes. So that's what we're planning on doing for this section. Okay, well, what you didn't see there is me sneezing. I hit pause there and had a sneeze, and then back. All right, so we're going to talk now about image formation in eyes and cameras and what that's all about. So let's first talk about human eyes and how human eyes do what they're supposed to do and how that relates to some of the concepts that we've talked about already this year. So, or in this unit. So the human's eye's sole purpose is to gather and focus light so that the image we're viewing can be interpreted by the brain. So basically, when you look at something, we know this, that light is coming from that something that you're looking at. It might be your computer screen right now. Maybe you're looking outside the window as you're listening to this. Light is coming from the object that you're looking at, and it's going towards our eye. And what our eye does is it takes that light and it focuses it in such a way as it hits the back part of our eye so that we can project an image on the back part of our eye. And then we've got special things on the back part of our eye called photoreceptors that allow that light information to be turned into electrical information, believe it or not, that runs up to our brain and triggers certain spots in our brain so that our brain can interpret the image that we're seeing. So it's kind of neat. Here's the parts, and we're going to learn some parts here. Remember, these bolded and underlined words are vocabulary words, words that I definitely want you to know what they are. And so we'll run through the parts really quickly here, and then I've got a diagram of the eye that will tie sort of all the pieces together with. So light enters through the eye, or enters the eye through the cornea. So that's the very front part of your eye. And if you've ever put a contact lens on before, the contact lens makes contact with the cornea. The cornea is a clear structure, and basically what it does is helps to protect our eye, but also does a tiny bit of focusing of the light. Remember, if light doesn't strike a spot in focus, then it appears blurry when we look through it. So when you look through a microscope or a pair of binoculars and they're out of focus, the whole image appears blurry. So we adjust the focus on the binoculars or whatever it is, allowing us to see a clearer image. Just beyond the cornea is a clear opening called the pupil. Okay, and this is the one that messes with a lot of people. That black part of your eye, okay, is just a hole. It's basically a clear hole that goes right in to your eye. So I'm going to go to the diagram here. This is a side view of our eye. So here's our cornea. That's this bit right here. And these blue lines, by the way, are light. Okay, and they're being focused by the lens, which we'll get to in a second. And then this hole right here, this gap, is where the light travels through in order to be focused. This gap here is called the pupil. And that pupil is just a hole, and it appears black because the light that's coming in is entering the eye, and then the eye is not filled with light itself. Okay. The size of the pupil is determined by the iris. Okay, the iris is the colored part of your eye, and the iris does two things: it dilates, or it relaxes. Okay, so sorry, I had that wrong. Let's try that again. It dilates or gets smaller, or I'm doing it wrong again. Hey guys, I can do this. I can totally do this. Let's try it one more time. It constricts and gets smaller, or it dilates and gets bigger. And if you want to try this, what you can try to do is maybe take out your phone, flip it to the view that you use to take selfies, and then take that phone and look into a dark room, right? Point it on your eyes, get it nice and close, and watch your iris and your pupil, and then turn and look into a bright room. And what you're going to see is that in the dark room, your pupil dilates, right? The iris opens up to allow lots of light in, to allow us to see in dim light. And then when you move your eye into the bright room, what happens is your pupil contracts or constricts. The iris closes up a little bit, and it shuts out a bunch of the light that could come in. So it adjusts. The iris is a little muscle that either constricts or dilates depending on how much light you want to let in. So that's a really cool experiment. You can try that at home if you want. Try it with a friend or a family member that's nearby, and see if you can do that. Look at something, be in a dark room, and then watch what your eyes do when you move out into a bright room. Okay, so that's the iris. Just on the other side of the pupil is the lens, and so on this diagram here again, right, we've got our iris, which is in green on here. which forms the pupil. And remember, the iris constricts or dilates depending on the amount of light that we're in. And then this structure here is called the lens. Okay, the lens is really the thing that does most of the focusing to get the light to focus on the back of our eye. And the back of our eye is this structure all the way around here called the retina. Okay, so the lens is it's really kind of cool actually. It's a relatively hard structure. It's curved. We would recognize this as a convex lens, right? It's got actually a double convex lens, so it's curved outwards as it faces the light, and it's curved outwards as it faces the retina. And what it does is it basically just refracts the light. And we know what refraction is because we've just studied it. After being focused or refracted by the lens, the light strikes the retina. And the retina, which is this, and believe it or not, the retina runs all the way along here, all the way along, except for this one spot right here, which I'll talk about in a second. And the retina contains the photoreceptors. Okay, the photoreceptors, remember photo means light, and so these are the light receptors. They're receiving light. And there's two kinds of photoreceptors that I want you to be aware of. Well, and that are found in our eyes, what we call rods and cones. Rods are sensitive to intensity of light, and they do most of the work in a dim room. Maybe at night when there's just a little bit of light coming in under the door or from your window, you'll notice that you don't really see a lot of color, if any, in that room. You may know what the colors are, but you're really not seeing color. And that's because the rods have taken over, and they're really what adapts us to see in dim light or intensity of light. They help us with the bright, the in-between, and the dark. What the cones do, the other photoreceptors, are called cones, and they're responsible for sensing colors, but don't do well in dim situations. Again, that's why we don't tend to see color in dim light, because there's no cones around or no rods around at that. Sorry, let's try that again. There's not enough light around for the cones to be stimulated at that point. So working together, the rods and cones allow us to see colors by the cones and intensity of light by the rods. The last structure that I want to talk about is this sort of patch right here, and then these little bits coming in. So these little bits coming in are blood vessels that are supplying the eye with blood that it needs to keep the cells alive. But this bundle right here that we've got coming out at the back here is called the optic nerve. This optic nerve is what gathers the information from all of the photoreceptors on the retina and sends that information to the brain for the brain to process and actually turn into an image that we understand. So there's a video that I posted on the Google Classroom that if you wanted to at this point have a look at. It's called How the Eye Works. It's about 3 minutes long, and I think it's definitely worthwhile giving a quick look to because it is a good rundown again of what I've just talked about. I'll mention a couple of things that you don't need to know, but I think are kind of interesting anyway. This structure here called a fovea. The fovea is the spot where we want light to focus in our eyes, because that is where we are going to get the clearest picture of what we're looking at. And if light is not focusing properly on the fovea, what ends up happening is everything we look at appears blurry. So this fovea is where our lens and our cornea are trying to focus light and get it to land. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to get back to that later on when we talk about corrective lenses like glasses that we use, because when I take my glasses off, everything is blurry. I can sort of see, but I can't see. And what my glasses do is actually provide another bit of refraction out here before light gets to here so that we can get light to land on the fovea. The last bit I want to talk about is right here. This is called our blind spot. And there are actually, you can see that there is no red part on this bit right here. And because there's no red part on this bit right here, there's no photoreceptors. And if there's no photoreceptors, if light is focusing on here, you're not seeing anything. So we call that spot the blind spot. Where the optic nerve comes into the eyeball, we have a blind spot. So if you haven't, go ahead and have a look at that video, and then I'm going to move on to the next section. So cameras versus eyes is the next section. So how is a camera similar and different to our eyes? And what might surprise you is that or maybe it doesn't, is that there's a lot of similarity between our cameras that we use, whether it's a digital camera or a film camera, and our eyes themselves. So they work in a similar fashion, and I wanna point this out to you. In both cases, they have a similar goal. The goal of a camera is to gather and focus light, right? So that we can create an image. The goal of my eyeball or my eyes is to gather and focus light. So they're both doing the same thing. So looking at the diagram that we have below, what structures of the camera are similar to those in an eye? Okay, well, there is a lens right here. Well, our eyes have a lens. That makes sense. Okay. There's an iris or a diaphragm, something that opens and closes depending on how much light we let in. Okay. There's a shutter. We kind of have a shutter. We can turn light off by closing our eyes, right? To close our eyelids. But that's a tough one. And then we have on the back here what's called a CCD or film. A CCD is what we use in our digital cameras to capture images, and I've got a video that'll talk a little bit about that later on. Or film camera if you've actually used a film camera before. So we have some similar structures. We have a lens, cameras have a lens. We have an iris, cameras have an iris. We have a retina full of photoreceptors. Cameras have a CCD or film full of photoreceptors. So our structures are working in relatively similar ways. So just to summarize then some similarities and differences. Both use double convex lenses to focus light. Both use a structure to regulate the amount of light that enters the eye. In our eye, or enters the device. In our eyes, we have the iris. In a camera, we have what's called the diaphragm. The lens of the camera is in front of the aperture, so here's a difference. Okay, so the lens is in front of the aperture or the opening or the pupil. And in the eye, the pupil is actually in front of the lens. So there's a bit of a difference. In a camera, it goes lens, diaphragm. In our eyes, it goes pupil, lens. So the lens is in a slightly different spot. A camera has a shutter that keeps light from hitting the CCD before it's ready to be exposed. Okay. The CCD, by the way, is called a charged coupled device, or film in a camera functions similarly to the retina in the eye. So we've talked about that similarity down here. We don't really have a shutter. You might argue that our eyelids are that purpose, but a camera's shutter works a little tiny bit differently. It's more like a diaphragm than anything. It doesn't open and close to get bigger or smaller, but it's open for a certain amount of time to let a certain amount of light in. So it works more similarly to the diaphragm than it does anything else. Hope that makes sense to you. So this is just a quick summary diagram. I think I took it out of your textbook actually, that sort of shows what's going on in each situation. You'll notice the similarities and differences that we have, right? So we've got a lens, we've got a lens in our eyes. Our camera has a lens. We have a pupil. They have an aperture. We have an iris. There would be a diaphragm, but it's not labeled right in this spot over here. We have a CCD or film back here. The camera has a CCD or film. We have a retina. Okay, so similarities and differences all the way through. So the next thing I'd like you guys to do at this point is I'd like you guys to watch a video another video on the Google Classroom called Eye versus Camera by Michael Mauser. It's about 5 minutes long, and it summarizes this really nicely and goes into a lot of detail about how digital cameras work, which is what everybody uses these days. Normally, so I'll let you go and do that. Okay. Normally, I would actually take out an SLR camera and show you guys what's going on. Well, maybe I'll do that. Let's see if that'll work. If it doesn't work, then this whole thing was for naught. So I'm going to pause for a second. Okay, so I'm back. I went and grabbed my digital camera. Because I'm a bit of a camera guy. I've always loved playing with cameras, and what I've got here is my digital camera. It's getting a bit old. It's probably 10 or 15 years old right now. But what's interesting about this camera is that I can show you a couple of things. This is called an SLR camera, or a single lens reflex camera. And what's great about these digital cameras is you can actually take off and remove the lenses and replace them with different kinds of lenses. I'll show you a couple of things just on the lens itself. I don't have the ability to show you what I normally would with my old film camera, because this one's a little fancier. So I'm just gonna do this for a second and bring a bigger picture up and show you what's going on with my SLR camera here. So I'm gonna pop the lens off. And a couple of things to notice first, and it's a little hard to see. I'll see if I can get a little bit of reflection. That's an inner lens here, and I can tell you right now, even though it's kind of hard to see on my digital cam or on my little tiny webcam here, it is a very convex lens. And then on this side is our other lens, and again, it's kind of hard to see, but it is also convex. What's really interesting, to show you the aperture part of things, I'm not going to fiddle with focus too much. I'm going to hold this up in front here. And right now, I've got my aperture on the camera closed. What that means is only a small amount of light is being let through. So this would be done when we have a situation where we're dealing with lots and lots of light. So maybe a nice bright sunny day, that aperture would be closed. And what I can do is I can gradually open up that aperture and make it a bunch wider to let a whole bunch more light through the lens. Okay, so this aperture can be very small or very large on the lens, depending on the type of light. So I would have the aperture wide open if I wanted to take pictures in dim light. Maybe I'm in a forest and I'm trying to take pictures of something in the forest. I would have this wide open. If I'm, out in a field right now, this time of year that's very, very snowy or very bright, then I would have the aperture closed. The only other thing I'll demonstrate to you, I'll put this lens back on. I just have to flip that back into that position. Is we can play around with something called the shutter speed, and I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this, but I'll go down to a very low shutter speed. So our cameras do two things to regulate the amount of light that comes into them. One is that aperture. The other one is the shutter speed. And the shutter speed, I'm going to hold this right up close, controls how long the shutter is open. The longer it's open, the more light gets through. The shorter time it's open, less light gets through. So I'm going to be very quiet, and maybe you guys can hear this. This is a slow shutter speed. I've got it set to, we'll do 1/2 second. Okay. It's not wanting to focus on something. Should have tried this ahead of time. Okay, I'm going to set it to. Yeah, it's not focusing for me. Hang on. It's not working. Darn it. Okay, I was trying to show you guys that there's a slow shutter speed, and so the shutter would be open for 1/2 second. So you kind of hear it go click and then click right away. And then I can get the shutter speed on this camera up to about a 4,000th of a second. So you could barely hear it open. And I would use that shutter speed in very bright light, or with a situation where I was trying to capture something moving very quickly. So in the situation of a sporting event, for example, if I wanted to make sure the images wasn't blurred of somebody jumping up, spiking a ball in volleyball or something along those lines, I would use a high shutter speed. If I was wanting to take pictures in low light of something that's not moving, then I would use a very low shutter speed. Well, sorry that didn't work perfectly, but I thought I'd demonstrate that for you as well. Okay, let's get back to the lesson then. So that's my little camera demo. At least you got to see the aperture, which is good. What we're moving on to next then is correcting our vision, and talking just a little bit about why some of us might need glasses and some of us might not. Simply put, our lens basically is not able to focus light properly on the retina, usually because our eyes have been squished this way or they've been squished this way. And I'm simplifying. So what we have here is what somebody with nearsightedness, which is what I have, would be experiencing, where our eyeball has been squished this way. And so what happens, you can see, is that light is focusing here. This is the focal point. Light is focusing in front of the retina. And so I would see a blurry image when I take and I do, when I take my glasses off. To correct that, we put a concave lens out in front of it. And what that does is it scatters the light just a little bit so that when the lens does its focusing, we get it to focus on the back of our eye, on our retina. If somebody is farsighted, meaning that you can see things off in the distance really easily, what it means is that your eye has been squished this way. Your eyeball has been squished this way. And so you can see it's actually going to come to focus, if it could, behind the eye. Okay, so it should be focusing here, it's focusing way back here. So what we do instead is we put a convex lens out in front. We know convex lenses focus light, concave lenses scatter light. And so we put a small lens in front of the eye in order to focus the light a little bit before it hits our lens, so that it can be focused right on the back part of the eye. Remember, the fovea is what we're trying to focus it on. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense why we have, or what we do with glasses, okay, or contact lenses or whatever it is. There's other ways to correct our vision. For example, we can have contact lenses that go on our eyes and do the same things as glasses do, just in a slightly different location. And then there's also a thing called laser eye surgery, where they can go in and take a thin flap of tissue and cut it off the cornea, and then a laser is used to alter the shape just below the cornea. And what that does then is allows light to be focused properly on the back of your eye. The flap is replaced and put back over, and that ends up correcting your vision. That's what we call LASIK eye surgery. Okay, so that's one thing that can be done. Okay, so at this point, if you want to, you can hit pause and go have a look at page 235 and the questions on there. The other thing I'm going to show you, though, is that there's another little bit in the textbook that I'd like you to skim through when you get a chance. I don't have any slides and there's nothing in your notes for it, but it's talking about other organisms' eyes and then how images are stored and transmitted via digital devices and things. And our textbook's a little bit out of date. You know, I think it was written in 2000 or something like that. So we've had 20 years worth of update to technology since then. What you can do to go over that stuff, I think would work just fine for me, is to move on to worksheet 5. Which is Eyes and Cameras Capture Images Using the Properties of Light. That's the name of the worksheet. Go ahead and do that, and near the end of it, it gets to talk about that stuff. But use your textbook to answer those questions at the end, because they're not here in the notes right now. Okay. The other thing that normally I would do this if we were working together in a classroom situation. So this is the normal activity that I would do with us. But because we're not working in a classroom situation, I am going to, if you want to, this is your bonus activity, is to work on this activity called Eyes in the Animal Kingdom. And it's going to have you moving through learning a little bit more about one organism's eyes and how they might be similar or different to ours as humans. And so the instructions are on here. If you've got time and you feel like you're not being inundated with too much stuff, by all means go ahead and do this. Pick an organism that you're interested in. And then you'll go down to the second page here and you'll put the name of the animal that you chose and a photo of the animal that you pulled off the internet, and then use reliable internet sites to answer these questions. What's the habitat? What role does your animal have? Is it a predator? Is it prey? Is it active in daylight or darkness? What features of the, and this is the big one, what features of your animal's eye help it to survive given its role, given its time of day when it's active, those kinds of things. And then please pop in the bottom here the sources of information that you use to find. So you're referencing where you found that information. So that's it. I've walked you guys through what you need to know for Concept C5. You can check the Google Classroom for practice questions that should be up shortly, as well as the summative quiz when we're done, and the activity I've just described is also on the Google Classroom. Remember, please, that as you're working your way through this, take your time, give as detailed answers as possible, and take the opportunity to check the key, for example, for worksheet 5 before you jump into the practice quiz. Do the practice quiz and then give me a day to get back to you with some feedback before you jump into the summative quiz. I don't want you to go practice quiz right away into summative quiz, because then you're going to end up making mistakes and not get a chance to correct them. The whole purpose of the feedback is to give me the opportunity to get back to you and say, hey, this was great, but, that kind of thing. So I think that's all I have to say for Concept C5. As always, stay healthy, stay away from each other than in an online situation. And hey, we'll talk again soon. One thing, I thought I was done, but I wasn't quite done. I forgot to point out that there were 2 more videos that I'd like you guys to watch if you get a chance. One is on how animals and people see the world differently, really cool video from National Geographic that I enjoyed. And then this other one here, 9 weird ways animals see the world. Really worthwhile having a look at that one as well. I think it's kind of cool, and you should have a look at it. Okay, I'm out. See you later.